This is Ivy Unleashed, a Gold Ivy production.
Oh my gosh, I just love the way you said my name. I love it. You sound like one of my homies that I grew up with in Chicago. Mm, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for observing that, sitting in it, reading it. And yeah, it's been a labor of love, honestly. And as you said, this is my fourth book, but I feel like this one really is kind of the amalgamation of everything, kind of in a girlfriend's guide where you can have a glass of wine and just, reel in the real life situations that sometimes actually suck and not be so heavy with it, because I think that's the thing that so many people are afraid of, that oh gosh, I have to sit in this grief for so long that I'll get stuck in it, and then we don't really move forward, which is why the book is called That Sucked, not This Sucks, meaning that we would still be sitting in the suck, but it's to actually honor what actually happened. So that's why it's past tense of that sucked. And now what to turn a new leaf, turn a new page, and maybe even grow some ivy at the end of it. Yes, I feel like I have walked the walk of major unrelenting loss and hardship and heartbreak and multiple adversities all before I was 19. And that's kind of when it all started. And for some listening to this, they may be in the middle of a suck right now. And for myself, my suck happened when I was 10 years old. And so I was 10, the oldest of, two younger brothers, and born out of an immigrant household. My dad and my mom wanted the American dream, and they came from different places. My dad was from India, my mom was from the Philippines. And so the first, thing that we learned growing up was a strong work ethic. They were tiger parents, and it was education and it was performance and accolades and just, the busyness of life. And so we were slept, to piano lessons and dance lessons and just performing. And that all kind of shifted when I was about 10, when my mom got diagnosed with breast cancer. And so she obviously, I remember when she got sick. I don't know, shout out to those of you who remember getting the chicken pox. So I remember vividly, I got the chicken pox, and my great grandmother, she was watching me. And I felt like, oh, wow, where is my family? Because she was getting surgery that day. So I knew that that particular day was so different because while I was itching and my great grandmother didn't want to touch me or be around me because she was, in her 80s, but she was the one watching while my mom was going through, and I didn't know this extensive surgery. But the meaning that I made behind that was no one's going to be there for you. You have to take care of yourself. And that was the very first time that, okay, I was going to grab that bottle of calamine lotion, put it all over me. But I remember feeling so sad and even abandoned. And later on that day, they came back home and then they broke the news to me that, and I didn't understand what that meant, but that she had breast cancer. Well, she had battled that for about 6 years. And then eventually the cancer had spread into her lungs and into her brain. And she passed when I was 16. And so, in a sense, there was a lot of relief because we had grown up literally in and out of hospital settings. Like I would come home, as a freshman, as a sophomore in high school, going instead of what my friends were doing, cheer practice and sports and things like that, I would go and do my homework in her, hospital bed. And that was so different. And so a year then after that, we would get another tragedy. My brother would have a severe asthma attack at school. He was 16 months younger than me. And we were supposed to meet. It was homecoming for both of our schools. I went to Lane Tech across the street from him, and he never made it. He actually had an asthma attack. His lungs collapsed over his heart and just instantly was gone. The paramedics, when they arrived, tried to revive him. And it was it was very shocking because he wasn't an athlete, but he also wasn't sick. That really took our family out for a while. So much so that my dad went into deep depression. We were just, there was anger, there was just so many feelings. Yet I felt like I needed to swallow my feelings because I needed to be strong. I needed to be strong, as I was told. Neeta, you're strong, you're resilient. That's when I first started hearing about the word resilient. Is I would hear this all the time from my family, from extended family. And so I felt like I needed to put this face on. And I remember I was a senior in high school at the time. I didn't go away for college. I got into all of the schools, couldn't leave my dad, couldn't leave my youngest brother. And it was actually his birthday. And so there was just a whole slew of confusing emotions. And finally, when our family was starting to, climb out of this tragedy and mess that we were in, we would get struck with another punch in the gut. Almost 2 years after that, my dad, we were literally getting ready to go to a family wedding for the very first time in a very long time in those years. And my dad, we decided to dye his silver fox hair. We decided to dye it black because we're like, oh, we're going to the first family wedding. If you've ever heard of Indian weddings, it's a big whole thing. And so, well, he was allergic to the dye. His face swelled up, and we had to rush him, call 911, rush him to the hospital. And I mean, my brother and I, we just looked at each other like, oh no, this is happening again. Because if you've ever experienced PTSD in any form or any sort of loss, you're like, oh gosh, is everyone going to die around me? And a few hours later, they came back with the tests and they diagnosed him with stage 4 lung cancer. And so that was it. The doctors gave him 9 months to live, and he transitioned at 10 months. And so at 19, I am now the caretaker of my youngest brother, who is now 14. And wow, was that an overwhelming amount of just sadness and grief. And so I was walking into my 20s with this huge chip on my shoulder, that I'm not going to let the world pity me or my brother. And I took on a ton of responsibility and pressure, that I'm going to just prove to everyone that this is not going to phase me or tear our family apart. There was a point where I needed to actually go into rock bottom, because I think that for that decade in my 20s was all around trying to prove my worth and trying to prove that I was okay, that I was better than okay, that I was actually chugging along. I was fine. So I went to I went to dental school, and I also fell in love, and I got married, and I did all of the things of the traditional trappings of success that I could gather to create or try to create this new identity for myself that was one of almost like a bulletproof, like Wonder Woman with her shield. But in my case, my shield and my foundation was not internally strong. And it wasn't internally strong. There was a shield on the outside, which was going to, you know, literally protect me from all of those deep dark feelings that for an entire decade I would shove under a rug. I would shove in the back closet, because I didn't want anyone to know anything. And I would then attract a partner, and my love relationships would be the one case where it would start to spill out. And we know this whenever we've been through something, or when we have patterns that run our life, maybe different kinds of friends, different people that betray you, different partners that cheat on you. There is kind of a thread. And for me, I had to then go through the biggest courageous moment of my life. And that would come almost a decade after my dad died. I was literally in my late 20s. I had already reached my pinnacle of what I thought success was. I had a cosmetic dental practice with my name on the door that I owned. I had about 10 people working under me, including doctors and other, hygienists and assistants. Yet I was so afraid that people would find out that I was actually in an abusive, physically, emotionally, mentally abusive relationship and marriage. And so all of that internal foundation would crumble on December 31st, 2011, where I would be in my, home that I had purchased with my significant other at the time. And I would be looking in my master bedroom on New Year's Eve in the mirror, fetal position, and just for the first time, fully crying and wailing and honestly scared. But that was that pivotal moment where I had to actually be on my knees and look in the mirror and say, how in the world did you get here? And to admit that I was actually in this situation, this relationship, this abusive relationship, and to actually admit for the first time 3 little words that would literally change the trajectory, which was, I need help. And to let people in, because I was keeping this deep, dark secret because I was so ashamed of what people would think. In our culture, we don't get divorced. In our culture, we don't share what's going on behind closed doors. And I knew that if I would stay, it would literally not be good for my life. And so I mustered enough courage that day. December 31st, 2011 was that day when I got out. And I left. I would leave that big home that I knew, all of the trappings of success, the community that was part of that whole world. And I would set forth on a journey, scary as heck, but finally to reclaim my power and have the bravery to then in the coming days, which I write in my book, to actually let people in and get a restraining order. Things got even messier before it got peaceful. But I knew that once I admitted that to myself, literally saying those words out loud, I need help, I'm feeling scared, because it was always in my mind and I would just suppress it and put it in the back closet again. But as soon as I let that pressure valve out, it was as if a ton of bricks just like melted into butter off of me. And that's when I started to begin building a new life. Yes. So I think that what we are told and what we've normalized just in our present society and what we see, the motivation videos that we see online, is that, resilience is that mental toughness, in that how strong you are and how tough you are. And yeah, that helped me for a little bit. That helped me get through some of my darkest days. Yet resilience can also be your ability to be soft, your ability to actually, if you think of the Latin root word resiliere, comes from Latin, right? Well, the definition of resiliere means to bounce back. And if you take, I use the analogy of a glass or a piece of granite. It's hard, it's tough, it's strong. And if we let that go, well, guess what? It's going to shatter, it's going to break to a million pieces. I have little kids, glass breaks all the time. But if you were to take a basketball or a volleyball and you hold that, or even those little bouncy balls that the kids get at the birthday parties, it is tough. It is strong, but it also has a little bit of give. It has a little bit of flexibility. It has a little bit of agility where when you try to squish it, it does give you that little bounce. When you let it go, it sometimes bounces back higher than before, and sometimes it doesn't. But that is the definition of resilience, is to make peace with both sides, the strength and the softness, the compassion and the toughness. And it took me an entire, decade, even more, to recognize that it's not just about being strong. It's also about our ability to, and there's, 4 pillars that I've defined now, especially on how to actually build your bounce factor. And this has literally been the core essence of my work. I became so fascinated about human dynamics ever since my parents were in the hospital settings. I was a psychology major. I literally my dental practice became a breeding ground for just having these psychological conversations with my patients, because I was curious at how our stories, how the thoughts we have in our mind, how the things that have happened for us or to us, how we sometimes make that meaning, like I did when I was 10 years old with my great grandmother, with my family, and how we can then actually shift that. But it takes 4 core pillars. And one of them, and the first one is really to be able to make peace and feel both feelings. I grew up feeling toxically positive because that was my coping mechanism. It was also my coping mechanism to suppress what I was really feeling and suppress the sadness, suppress the grief until it had nowhere to go. It was literally overflowing, which is when I started saying the words, I need help. And those 3 words shifted everything for me in my relationships, in the way that I led, in the friendships that I had, in the friendships that I let go, because of those 3 words. And that was the beginning of building this new way of experiencing and growing our resilience that's not just based on being tough. It's also a practice that I have. When you actually grab the book, I take you through a 5-day healing practice. And this is one of the resources. It's free. It's for all the book buyers. You can actually get it at thatsucknowwhat.com when you put in the code of wherever your order number of where you got the book. But then it actually walks you through 5 days of being able to heal the suck, process the suck, heal your relationships. Day 1, we start out with relationships. Day 2, we start out with how we actually move through those sucky moments. Day 3, we're talking about, having abundance and creating that life that you want. And 4, we talk about having the courage to take brave action, but it doesn't start without understanding and embracing your emotions. So, and the whole idea around this, and I love that, Brooke and Andrea, you have highlighted this page. It's one of my favorites. And you're absolutely right. This has been sparked, honestly, through motherhood, to see the beauty on the other side, and to also see, well, how do our kids, they have the, relentless capacity to just, if they want a toy, if they want candy, my 2-year-old is like, she's banging her head on the floor. She's like kicking and screaming. And we've learned not to do any of that. We've learned to suppress. We've learned to numb. We've learned to distract. And boy, do we have some amazing tools for distraction now. We just pick up that phone and we're like, okay, we're going to numb our feelings today. And so for this, I'm actually allowing you to, one, embrace the suck. And it starts with putting our hand over our heart and to actually allow yourself to breathe. And this is biggest thing that you can do for your nervous system, because our nervous system, when we're wired and we have stress and we have all of these things. I grew up in a chaotic household, and sometimes when you have chaos that's happening in life, some people who are listening are probably, maybe going through divorce, maybe going through their own suck in their mind of whatever is not going right. Well, allow yourself to put your hand over your heart. This calms your nervous system down. This activates your rest and digest. And it allows you to just remember to breathe, and not just breathe from your chest, but also breathe from your stomach. And what it does is it actually signals your brain to release oxytocin, because if you think of your hand as that embrace from a caregiver or caretaker from when you were 6 or 7 years old, now you can do that for yourself. You don't need anyone. You can be that advocate for you. And then to just breathe and to then experience the suck and experience what didn't go well. So when I ask you to experience it, I'm asking you to, well, bring up whatever feelings that you are feeling. Is it sadness? Is it grief? Is it just disappointment? Is it jealousy? Bring it up. Where do you feel it in your body? Usually when I'm angry or upset, I'll start clenching my teeth, or I have tension headaches, or my shoulders go up to here. And so I'm, tensing up my shoulders. Where do you feel it? Allow your body to feel that for 60 to 90 seconds. And then what we want to do is you can actually close your eyes or you can keep it open, but notice if you're constricting your shoulders, okay, what are we actually doing? We want to actually meet that suck, meet it as a friend. And I actually do this as a meditation as well, where we visualize that the suck is in front of you and we give it a picture, we give it a name, we give it a visualization. Usually it's like a circle or a ball, but that we're envisioning it as something that is giving us a signal, because guess what? Pain is a signal. It's a signal that, hey, we're doing too much. Or if you've ever, got up really fast and you have one of those days where you spill coffee on your shirt, you bump your knee, and then you bump your elbow again, and you're like, what the heck? That's pain. It's an indicator in the most superficial form to say, hey, slow down. Where do we got to go? And so if we can meet that suckiness as a friend to say, oh, wow, okay, yeah, does not feel good to feel this. That's why I want to pick up my phone right now and call someone. That's why I want to go to the cupboard and get something to eat. That's why I want to use my remote and Netflix all day. Notice what that suckiness is asking you to pay attention to. Oh, wow. Yeah, that breakup. Ooh, seeing that photo of him with another woman. Okay, what does that make me feel? It makes me feel unworthy. It makes me feel really angry that I couldn't control that, right? So allow yourself to feel and notice when you're practicing this, you're releasing the constriction from your body. So if your, shoulders are tensed up, or if you are grinding your teeth, then maybe you're noticing where you are holding tension, and to just release that and to breathe into that. And maybe some more urges will come up. Maybe you will notice, okay, I need to hit something. I need to punch something, or I need to go for a walk. I have so much energy bottled up. But these are the things that, guess what? Pain is telling you to do something. I think we misjudge when we have anger and rage. And some of us, depending on our upbringing, we're told, Neeta, you're strong. Neeta, you've got this. So I put my anger and rage in a closet where I'm not going to feel that, until this all came out for me in postpartum, where I couldn't control the emotions that were so overwhelming that I had to reframe that, because society tells us that we should just be sugar and spice and everything nice, and that we're not supposed to feel. But when we allow ourselves to feel, the expanse of all of those emotions, then we can start to heal. What we do not feel, we don't heal. And that's what I love about this practice. And I have a few of these in the book. This is just the first um, mini one that I take you guys through to actually notice how those emotions arise in our body. Oh, yes. So I don't know if, I think that for me in how I was grown up or how I was brought up, we went to therapy, yet because there was so much tragedy in our life for me as a teenager. And I think it was also mandated that they were worried. School officials and counselors were worried about my brother and I. So it was a different kind of therapy. Now, when I hit my rock bottom after my divorce and my marriage, I knew I was just ready to say yes. And this is one of the frameworks I also talk about in the book. When you have a fall, and the fall stage is that stage one where you have it's a medical diagnosis, it's a health challenge that's not getting better. It's a breakup. You find that text, the betrayal text. You find the shock that you've been lied to. That's the fall. And then it encourages you to make a decision. That's the ignition. That's the fire that's lit under your belly. Or, to actually say, all right, we've got to do something about this. Are you going to see a doctor for that diagnosis? Are you going to stop smoking? Are you going to what is that next urgent step? Are you going to stay? Are you going to go? Are you going to stay in this situation or are you going to do something about it? So that's that ignition phase. And I was in that ignition phase where the pain got so bad, the threats got so bad that I needed to leave. And in the rising stage, when somebody is rising, and this is stage 3, and this is the most important stage, it's easy to say, no, I'll just avoid it or whatever. But when you're ready to make that shift, like many of you are listening, it's uncertain. You are okay with the uncertainty because you are committed to making change. And for me, it was asking different people, what did you do? How did and asking people for support. And when you ask people for support, the resources come. It's like the Buddha proverb, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Oh, angels were appearing in the form of mentors, advisors. When I let people in, I remember coming into my office and sharing with my dental team that I was going through this divorce and I completely broke down. I couldn't hold it in. And that was the first time they actually saw me, in this most vulnerable state. And I said, if anybody is worried about, their jobs, you can leave. I don't know if I'm going to be able to, keep this open. I just didn't know. And I was okay in the acceptance of not knowing and not trying to fix. And it was just like here. And so that open the opportunity for people to be like, hey, you can stay on my couch, you can stay here, or here, let me give you resources, or I just went through this myself and I'm so glad you're sharing it. Here, I'm going to give you, this person to talk to. So they started, just the resources started coming, and I dove into everything, whether it was books on narcissism and codependency, because I was in a codependent relationship and I had attracted and had been with narcissists and sociopaths. And so I went through that rabbit hole. I went through talk therapy. I went through, EMDR. I started the ancient practice that I saw my dad do for, when I was growing up, ever since I was a little girl, the practice of meditation and puja and prayer, and with such reverence for it, because I'm like, oh, that's what he was doing. And I started going to temple. I started, I was in a evangelical church group. I said yes to all different kinds of community. And I noticed that when I said yes to these communities, I noticed that people were curious about the same things. How do we rise above challenges? How do we speak our truth? And how do we actually move through these sucky moments? And that was the through line. And I started, even saying yes to things like improv and stand-up comedy, just to get out of my own head of being so in my head, and the perfection that I had around, oh gosh, and I talk about emotional perfectionism in the book, on sometimes how we have to be, this prim and proper, and there's only one emotion that we can be feeling all the time. And God forbid, we have a nervous breakdown, then we're named like the crazy, woman on the street. And it's because society has not normalized that. Yeah, we can have a bad day, actually, and that is normal. It is normal to express our range of emotions. And I didn't see that until, obviously, much later, when I became a mom and had children. But it was these processes. So, spending time getting to even know myself. I didn't even know what my favorite color was, because I was so used to putting everyone else's needs before myself. And I was so used to covering up for other people, that this was the first time I was starting to pour into me. And it was very unusual for me to even walk that. So the rising stage is all about, you're wobbly, you're kind of like Phoenix rising from the ashes. You're the toddler that's like getting up but still falling. Yeah, it's beautiful. And like the toddler who doesn't care because they're standing up and falling again, they're smiling. You're smiling because you're like, I know I'm onto something. And it's going to take time, but you are starting to regain your confidence because you are starting to do things out of your comfort zone. And doing things out of your comfort zone invites good stress. And as I talk about, one of the pillars to building and increasing your bounce factor is to dive into and invite good stress. And so for me, was it, doing different kinds of workouts? I got very into yoga and I got very into meditation. And that was just, I think it was a way for me to just have that connection with my dad, in that very healing way. And I knew that when I would sit in meditation and go to these groups that had different kinds of meditation, whether it was Kundalini or attached to just regular yoga and Shavasana, that was something that I was doing, if not daily, at least 3 to 4 times a week, and saying yes to the retreat, saying yes to all different kinds of various different things that would open my worldview. It took me to 45 different countries. Nobody needs to do that, but what, unless you want to, but what in your life can you actually do? And I have a whole list of examples that you can actually do to start, in the next phase after rising, is magnifying in your life. Is it joining a book club? Is it creating a book club? Maybe, you start with this book with a few of your friends. Or it's joining whatever, meetup group or anything that you want to challenge yourself with. And that was huge for me, because one step led to another, led to another, led to another. I created a nonprofit called Independent Awakening, and that was my nonprofit that taught women and girls the power of self-confidence and using their voice. And that led to, coaching and advising, and then leadership coaching, and it led to, literally my next career, which has been investing and writing books. And so I mean, what a journey from dentistry into kind of some of the avenues. But it was because I led with curiosity. And it was because I was so unapologetic about being the tiniest and the smallest fish in the room. And I was so open to healing that I said yes to all of these different things, whether it was in the form of, it started with books, then it was with YouTube videos and podcasts like yours. And then, and then you'd hear somebody amazing from a podcast, and then you'd go and work with them. And that's literally how it started. And so I think wherever you're at in the stage and season of life, you're hearing this at a time where maybe you are open to that ignition and you are like, okay, I've got nothing to lose. And that was my mantra. I had nothing to lose. It, it didn't scare me anymore. And I was actually okay being in the discomfort and the uncertainty because I was so used to trying to control everything. I mean, that was my abandonment wound growing up. I needed to be in charge of everything because everything around me was falling apart. And so I ask yourself, if you are curious to know what your patterns were, we actually dive into this in uncovering some of that. If you are ready to go there, that's in part 2 of the book. Oh gosh, yes. For me, I had to be okay with not being okay. That was the biggest, deconditioning, the biggest unlearning. And, especially if you are taught that if like nope, we're good, we're gonna rise up, we're resilient, and we keep going and we keep going and we keep going. It's no wonder that, the latest stats are we're in burnout. We are in burnout. I think I came across an article around mom burnout after the pandemic, and mom burnout was real. And even that, I think there was another study that was around a third of young people are afraid to share, what's really going on. And so we have these mental health struggles alone in silence because everyone's trying to post their best, Instagram photo and life photos. But can we normalize being in the suck? And to decondition that, that's why this book is called That Sucked, Now What? That's why one of the hashtags is embrace the suck. And when we're able to embrace the suck, or when we're able to embrace what sucked, we get away from perfectionism. I'm a recovering perfectionist. That's come, through a ton. Do I notice her when she still comes up? Sure. I think that we all have different parts of ourselves that come up for a reason. And there is the understanding that there is elements of us. I tried to suppress the angry parts of myself because I thought, and I was told when I was little, nope, good girls don't get angry, you know. But it took me a really long time to then go into my own bout with motherhood when I was first pregnant with my son, and to feel those enormous, intense, big feelings of postpartum depression that I had no idea why it was so taboo. I was talking and like it was Kool-Aid, basically. Like it was just like the regular, thing to chat about, because with my girlfriends, we all had this understanding that, you know, there's there's something that happens when we are in this kind of postpartum mode after our bodies do this really big, huge marathon for ourselves, and that things are kind of, in the crosswires, but we're also sitting in not doing for the first time. And it's huge for anyone that's like an ambitious woman or type A, or someone that is used to controlling things. And so I had to learn to just surrender and let other people take care of me for the first time, that I needed to be mothered. And that was huge for me because I didn't know how to receive. And because I didn't know how to receive, I was pushing people off, including my amazing mother-in-law, who's the sweetest. And my now partner, my now husband, he was like, "What is going on? Like, where's my wife? Like, where's?" And I had to again say, "Oh my gosh!" And I would have visions of back in the hospital when I was a teenager, and my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and all of that anger was coming up, but I bottled it. But interestingly, what we don't feel, we don't heal, because then it would come back around almost 15 years later, in ways where I'm like, oh wow, thank you, anger, for being here. And yeah, like, all right, I guess I'm not crazy, but I need to feel this fully. And I talk about, how to create your own rage practice or your own emotional release practice of letting things out. And this has, of course, been inspired by my children. My 2-year-old, at the time, he's now 4, my son, and we chose to really be very aware of how we're talking to him about his feelings, because I didn't want to pass down what I was told, even though it's so much easier, so much harder to, you know, be in the suck of a toddler crying for 20 minutes, and versus just saying, what I heard growing up, I'll give you something to cry about if you don't stop right now. Right. And so that's easy. But when we know, and when we're deconditioning the things from our parents, things that we don't want to no longer carry in our worldview, it takes courage, it takes bravery, it takes discomfort. It is a little bit harder. And I would even start with making a list of some of those things that you're probably like, oh, yeah, I got to unlearn that piece. And the other thing that I had to unlearn is that success was not based on what you're, doing in the world. Because when I left dentistry, that was a huge thing for my family. Huge. I had, tons of debt when going into dental school and taking out loans and things like that. And it was a huge thing to share with my family that I was going to sell my practice that was very lucrative, and move cross country to do something completely new that I actually did not know what I was going to be doing. I just knew that I did no longer wanted to be in that world. And that came with a lot of naysayers. It came with a lot of judgments and noise from the outside, where I had to clear it, and I had to put the blinders on. And so, if for you listeners, if you are going through that time, I even had certain members of my family during my divorce stop talking to me because they believe so strongly not in divorce, because it would be a bad name for their family, that to this day they don't talk to me. And I had to make peace with that, because my sovereignty, my agency, and I talk a lot about agency in the book, that was it's my story. It's nobody else's. And in fact, it shouldn't be anyone else's but yours, because this is your walk and this is your path. And other angels and people and other friends will come once you release and cut cords and cut ties with those that do not support you in this new season and stage of your life. Well, it was, like I said, it was listening to podcasts like yours. It was also going to and immersing myself around different communities. When I started saying yes to going to um, like a entrepreneurial event in a different state, I had to travel to this place, and just being around other like-minded people who had left their traditional careers, who were working in the online space, who, were doing things like coaching uh and were living it remotely in different parts of the world. I was like, well, what? It really opened my eyes to what was possible, because I, before that, would only go into my dental conferences, and that was the only thing, and I wasn't opening myself up to other things. I said yes to the yoga retreats. I said yes to the meditation retreats. I said yes to the wellness retreats. I said yes to, you know, working with other women in a retreat capacity to say, "Oh, wow, this." And that's what was kind of the carrot on the stick. It was like, oh, put me around more of these people. And, the as the quote, you are the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. For me, it was a constant evaluation of, okay, who are the five people that I'm, you know, hanging out with most? Oh, yeah, that's saying a lot. And at the time when I was going through this, it was I had my books. It was Wayne Dyer, it was Brian Johnson, Philosopher's Notes. These were these were my mentors. There's another book from Oprah that I had, because shout out to Chicago. She was such a huge figure there, and that's where I grew up. I mean, but these were the things that I like fed in my mind, over and over and over again, especially when I was making some of the hard decisions. And then actually going to, saying yes to different opportunities. It got me to speak at places like Google. It got me to start being curious and actually doing research, which I had to interview, I close to 500 people for my first book. And to really understand how leaders make decisions. And that was huge, because I was under the impression, I was so fascinated around how, after adverse moments, how leaders can rise. So if they had an adverse moment in their business, or, um, you know, a company went bankrupt, how do they actually rise to the next step? And I was just curious around that, because I wanted to be a better leader, so that I wouldn't have to stay in my practice for 5 days out of the week. And I eventually was able to just be there twice a month. And then I was constantly traveling back and forth, speaking on behalf of my nonprofit. And when I realized, hey, wait, people are asking me to speak not just on my nonprofit, but for myself, I was like, oh, that's new. That's different. And when I said yes to a nonprofit management course, was a weekend course at Stanford, um, it was a dream for me to even go there. And I said, sure, yes. When all of the professors were from the business school at Stanford, and they were talking about disrupting and startups and, startup world. And I was, again, the smallest person. I didn't go to, business school, but I was the smallest person in that room, asking questions on how to make my tiny little nonprofit just a little bit better. And because I led with the vulnerability, not with the ego. And I think that was the one of the superpowers that allowed me to then have these VCs, these venture capitalists, to say, hey, what are you doing that you get to leave your dental office? You're a startup too. I didn't even realize I was a startup. So these were just some of the things that started shifting so fast. And then I was getting brought into, invest in female led startups. And I was on the advising side because the same things that I was doing in my business was also being able to replicate on the other side to help leaders with their emotional health process conflict and dive into conflict and have better conversations. And and so I think for anybody that is like on the path or has a lot of naysayers and is just starting out, I think the first thing is let's make peace what we couldn't control. That's the first thing. Let's make peace with what we couldn't control in our past. Maybe it's the past stories we said to ourselves. Maybe it's a deconditioning or an unlearning piece, but that's that first piece is let's make peace with our past. Sometimes it's our upbringing. And the second is this emotional capacity. Allow yourself to feel you are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not a failure. You're just human, and that is okay. What does jealousy say about you? What does the anger say about you and about what you're feeling? Jealousy is a tool that it shows us that, hey, why does she get that fancy car and that house on the lake and the fancy travel? It's only because there's parts of yourself that is suppressing what you truly deeply want in your heart. And you're making excuses as to why you can't have them. But what if you just cut those roadblocks out, start to feel, and maybe start to appreciate, like, yeah, go queen. Like, look at this queen living her best life and doing all of the things that she wants to do. So celebrating more, because when we celebrate more, we are able to be in that energy so that we can also get more and receive more. Feeling your feelings is the second one, but the third is inviting and doing things that scare you, inviting that good stress. When we're challenging ourselves, we're actually shifting our, brain pathways. Literally, this is like scientifically proven. When we do hard things, like, I don't know, go in a cold plunge. Andrea, I know you're like an athlete, right? That helps with recovery, but it also helps with inflammation. That's just on the physical side. But what if we had more difficult conversations? What if we actually led with vulnerability first instead of asking and saying, oh, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's good. Everything's good. You're like, actually, no, let's unpack that. And what's really going on? And that's the work. That's the juicy. That's the golden, ivy. That's it. And the last part of that is really being okay and building your RSA, which is your radical self-awareness. And this is the radical self-awareness piece where you are in tune and that maybe you don't want to go to that party next week. Maybe you've overcommitted in the past and you're like, I'm just so exhausted. I'm just going to honor my body and I'm going to say no. And or maybe that nagging friend is constantly all about herself, yet you're so afraid to say, hey, like, I think there's two of us. I'm always there for you. I would really love it if you could just listen to me for once. That's radical self-awareness. That's knowing what is in alignment with you and what no longer is, and to be okay with that. That's your bounce factor. Oh, yes. Well, you can get the book wherever books are sold. It's on Amazon. I love Bookshop, bookshop.org. It's great because they do give back to the local retailers and bookstores. So, but if you're also by a Barnes and Noble, they are also there as well. And when you actually get the book, go ahead to thatsuckednowwhat.com and put in your order number, and you can actually get the free 44-page workbook and the 5-day free healing practice to get started on your journey of healing. And it comes with every day 10-minute meditations, kind of like the one that I kind of broke down for us in the beginning of the book. Oh, yes. Well, the first thing would be embrace the suck. Embrace the suck and let's be brave to try something new. And I would say the third thing is, your golden ivy is right at the other end of you just saying yes to the adventure. So if, I think you've arrived here for a reason today, and maybe this has sparked that curiosity for you to move through your next chapter with grace, with grit, with toughness and softness, and all of those emotions can coexist at the same time. That you don't have to hold it all together. You can be okay to not be okay. Yeah. So that is that radical self awareness piece. That's your RSA, because I think our head and our ego wants us to go, 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 especially if you're so used to going. That would be a practice for you to slow down. It's actually my daily mantra now is okay, slow down and receive, slow down and receive. But maybe for some of you where you are so used to taking your time, you are so used to playing small, you are so used to playing in the background, that maybe this is your ability to, instead of surrender, because you've constantly surrendered, but this is your ability and this is your opportunity to just to go do that first thing, do it without thinking about it, and have that ability to just say yes to that thing, and to get out of your comfort zone, and see how you grow as this next phase of you blossoms. Oh gosh, it has been. Yes. And I think that, I just recently shared some photos of finally taking that, it was like 8-month break with my kids, and just to be on the beach and soak up the ocean medicine vibes. And that was just everything that I needed. But when I think that there are seasons of that. And because mom guilt comes up a lot for me, especially when my kiddos are, 1 and 4, and you want to spend the time with them. And I have people that, then they're like, but this is the only time before 5 that you have. And then, of course, there's more mom guilt. But I think, at the end of the day, the remembrance that I have is that I would never want my kids to feel resentment for what dreams they are pursuing because they want to be close to mama, and that I would love for them to spread their wings. And so the reminder for myself is, yeah, for me to spread my wings, but also when there's, you know, kiddo time and family time, that it's blocked off in the calendar, and that is like we're going in, and it's everything that we're doing is like fully present and fully there. Because I know that many times we can be in the same room, but then they're playing with their toys, and then, we're doing other things and we're not fully present. But when those moments when you are, you're actually, diving right into that so that they have that. And I think we can definitely have our cake and eat it too, if we're thinking about it in terms of quality over quantity. Be brave, F up as much as you can because that's where the beauty is, the messy middle, and that's where our biggest expansion is for our own growth. I think for years I was so afraid of making mistakes and not being perfect and not allowing myself to be seen because I was afraid of being judged and just let it all out because this is the best way and the fastest way we learn. Oh, thank you, ladies. This was a pleasure, Brooke. Andrea, amazing. That, everything is on the other side of that breakdown. So embrace the suck and have the bravery to rise again anew.